In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to do a top-down modeling assembly approach for a product, and we're going to end up utilizing some of the various techniques we've used before in Fusion, but it is a little different from compared to doing a bottom-up approach. So the first thing is I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to call this the clamping V-block for some of you that may know what that is. I'm going to go ahead and you're kind of going to know what this is going to look like. For those of you that don't, I'm going to be pulling from drawings that I do have available, but I'm not going to be able to show on screen right now, and that's kind of where we're going from. But if you follow along, you'll be able to go through and again be able to do the approach. Or if you just watch, you're going to understand kind of where we're going with this. This video is probably going to be this kind of topic's going to be broken up over at least a few different videos, because in a top-down modeling approach, we do need to model all the parts together, and that's kind of what's going to happen. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start a new component. I'm going to call this the base, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK. This is active now. We want to make sure the radio button is active in Fusion, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new sketch, and I'm going to choose the front plane. Before I start drawing, I want to make sure my units are set to millimeters. And then from here, I'm going to create two lines. This is going to be a symmetrical part, and I'm going to develop two lines to which I'm going to, almost like a quadrant system or a Cartesian coordinate system, I can select both of these and toggle construction. And then I'm going to use the midpoint geometric constraint, choose the line, and select the origin. The midpoint of those lines will be constrained to the origin. You'll notice how they turn black, and if I drag them, they can go through and get larger or smaller based upon, what size of sketch I need to create. But I'm going to end up drawing only a quarter of this part, and I can go ahead and start drawing some of that. One thing as we start drawing, you'll see that maybe our sketch will scale up or down, and that's going to be what we end up having. So just 1/4, and from here I'm going to go ahead and start dimensioning. The overall height of this part, and I'm going to use these lines, is going to be 30, so that's going to scale that down. It was about 60 when I drew it. And then the overall width, as I look from here to here, is also going to be 30. Now, some of this may change a little bit. You'll see this got a little bit shallow, but I can go ahead and click from here to here. This will be 6 millimeters. This height here will also be 6 millimeters. And then as I start to look at some of the other components, from this line to this corner, this is going to be 3. And then from this line to here, this will be 20. Okay, so some things that we may want to take a look at is, okay, so here's our problem, is we may go through and see that our our line is still able to keep moving. So I think I did miss one dimension from here to here. This is also 20, and that will lock that into place. Okay, before I move on to go to extrude, I'm going to go ahead and use the mirror tool, which can be found under the create panel. And it asks what objects I want to mirror. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag to highlight all the lines that I need. And then I'm going to go ahead and choose the mirror line. I'm going to choose this one. I'm going to mirror that over like so. I'm going to choose mirror one more time, highlight everything that I just did, and then choose this bottom line and say OK. Now we'll end up seeing that there are a full sketch there, fully dimensioned, fully constrained, and ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the sketch. I'm going to go ahead and extrude. I'm going to go ahead and do a symmetric extrusion of 100 millimeters. So for our block, now we only want to do, so right now this is set at half distance, so total this is 200. I want to choose the half distance this way, so that way it's only 100 millimeters. So you'll see that there, and say OK. All right, so here's our base component all finished and ready to go. What I'm going to end up doing, what makes this different from the bottom up, is I'm actually going to create another component with this component in mind in the same file. In order to do that, I want to go back up here to my main level, activate the top level components, always, always important that you do that. So there is a way to go through and get components out of there, but the best way is when you're done with one component, always make sure you're going back up there and activating. So I'm going to choose a new component. This one I'm going to call the slider component, and I'm going to say OK. It's going to become active. The first component is going to be grayed out, but you can see your mouse when you hover over it, lines will still highlight, and that's kind of the component part of it. So I'm going to say create sketch. I'm going to choose that front plane again. Now in some of these cases it may be kind of hard to see. If you notice my plane's kind of laying down, because I can also put it on like the front or the back of this. So usually what I like to do is go to the origin and choose which plane that you want to work from. I guess this would be in this case the XZ plane. So from here, my slider, I'm going to click, I'm going to hit P on my keyboard to project, and I'm going to use some projection lines on this one. I just want to choose, I don't want to choose the entire object, but I do want to use like these 4 lines, actually 5 lines there, to go through and utilize for my drawing. I'm going to say OK. So those are going to kind of help me. I'm going to go ahead and use my line tool. From this corner, I'm going to draw out. I'm going to draw up like this. And I'm going to put a little kind of point there. And then at this point, I'm going to kind of do, I'm going to do the same kind of thing as I'm going to go from the origin, and I'm going to draw a line straight up. And I'm going to make this a construction line. I can also right click and choose normal / construction line. I'm going to click the line tool again and set this little point right up here. And then what we're going to end up seeing is that we're going to use the 3-point arc, which we can find under the create panel. We can connect these like so, and then also we'll end up having a little bit of a line. You got to be careful on this one because you can get the midpoint and it will constrain, and then you're not going to know where exactly that you're hitting at with your arc. So I just showed that with the line tool, but I can go ahead and click on this, and then again you want to stay off of that midpoint. You want to try to click right about there. Okay, so this is kind of the general shape we're going for. There's going to be a few kind of fillet edges. Let's go ahead and get some dimensions on this beforehand. I'm going to go ahead and do from top to bottom. This is going to be 80 millimeters. Your sketch may kind of mess with you a little bit, but you can always drag that down, so that way you can kind of keep your shape. One thing that you'll see before we get too far is notice the center points for these arcs. One is right here for this arc. The other one's right there. So the one thing we definitely want is a horizontal vertical for this center point to the origin, and the same thing for this one. And then the other thing is too is we want to make sure, using the coincident constraint, we want to make sure these 2 arc points have the exact same center point. So when I drag down, there you go, you're going to see that curvature kind of happen. So then I can go ahead and put a 36 millimeter radius on this one. This one will be 24. The width of this here to here is going to be 16. So I had that one correct. And then looks like from here to here will be 6. And looks like the height from here to here will be 36. And then for the last part up here toward the top, from this side to here, this will be 12. Okay, there are, like I said, there are a few little things, so I'm going to use the fillet tool. There is a round right here of, so from here to here, that will be 4 millimeters. And then there's one up here toward the top, which will end up being, based on my drawing, looks like it's going to be another 4 millimeters here as well. So fillet tool, 4 millimeters, and hit enter. Okay, so this is fully constrained at this point. The projected lines are going to help fill in the gaps. I can do like what I did before. I can mirror my shape and choose the mirror line to go over, and you'll see now I get a filled in shape. I can finish the sketch. I'm going to extrude this shape here. Same thing, I'm going to do a symmetric extrusion, and it's going to be 20 millimeters. And again, we want to choose a whole length for that and say OK. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new sketch on the top of it, on the rectangular face. I'm going to create a center diameter circle. And with that, I'm going to choose the dimension tool. The diameter of this is going to be 12, and then the rest of this is going to be fully constrained. I can extrude, choose the circle. I could start to cut. One thing that I can do is I can choose, instead of distance, I can say to object, and then I can go ahead and click right on the inside face, and it'll stop right there and say OK. And this will finish out the slider component. And at this point I'm going to stop. So we got two more components to add in, and then we'll take a look at some joints and maybe editing some joint limits for this assembly. But once we're done, let's go back up to the top level and activate the component. Now you'll see both of these. You don't want to click and drag on these two parts because they are not constrained together yet, even though it looks like it. We'll need to use some joints in here to go through and make that happen. But in the next video, we'll take a look at the next two components.